Each of us was designed by our Creator with senses that enable us to interact with our physical universe. One of those senses is the sense of sight, or vision. Being able to see and enjoy the wonders of creation is a gift we should never take for granted. In this lab, we will begin an investigation of optics, which is the branch of physics that deals with light and vision. As always, before beginning any experiment in the laboratory, be sure you are familiar with laboratory safety requirements. For a demonstration of basic lab safety rules, you can watch our video entitled Lab Safety. The things we see are visible because of light. Objects that emit their own light are luminous objects. The sun, a burning light bulb, and a candle flame are all luminous objects. Objects that reflect light from luminous sources are illuminated objects. A room lit by the sun, a room lit by a lamp, and a room lit by a candle are all illuminated objects. To see an illuminated object, light from a luminous source must reflect from the object and travel to our eyes. Inside the eye, the reflected light reaches the retina, where cells called photoreceptors convert light to nerve impulses. The nerve impulses are sent along the optic nerve to the visual cortex in the brain. In the visual cortex, the impulses are interpreted as vision, and we see the object. When light shines from a luminous source of light, such as the sun or an electric light bulb, we see what is called white light. There is no apparent color in the light. So, where do colors come from? Why is a rose red and a leaf green? Although light appears to be colorless, it is actually made up of all the colors of the rainbow blended together. The complete range of colors that the human eye can perceive is the color spectrum. Light is a form of electromagnetic radiation with frequencies ranging from about 400 terahertz to about 800 terahertz. Its wavelengths range from about 750 nanometers to 380 nanometers. Within that range of frequencies and wavelengths are the colors of the color spectrum. The color spectrum actually contains millions of colors, which were traditionally grouped into 7 principal colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Indigo has such a narrow range of wavelengths that it is difficult to distinguish it from blue or violet. For this reason, many physicists omit indigo and replace it with cyan, which is a color between green and blue. At the lower end of the color spectrum, red light begins at a frequency of about 400 terahertz and increases to about 480 terahertz. Its wavelength begins at about 750 nanometers and decreases to about 625 nanometers. Notice that wavelength decreases as frequency increases. At the opposite end of the color spectrum, violet light begins at a frequency of about 670 terahertz and increases to about 800 terahertz. Its wavelength begins at about 450 nanometers and decreases to about 380 nanometers. However, these values are only approximations, since light of one color gradually blends into the next color in the color spectrum. Red blends into orange. Orange blends into yellow. Yellow blends into green, and so on. Dispersion of light into its component colors can be demonstrated with a triangular glass prism. If we use a focused beam of high-intensity white light, we can see the path of the light on this reflective surface. When we place a triangular glass prism into the beam of light, the light is refracted and its path changes. The change in direction of the light is so great because light is refracted twice by the prism. The first refraction occurs when the beam of white light passes from the air into the glass of the prism. The second refraction occurs when the beam of light passes from the glass back into the air. Each time the light refracts, it changes direction. Because of the shape of the prism, each wavelength of light refracts at a slightly different angle, so the white light is divided into bands of color. The division of white light into its component bands of color is called dispersion of light. Dispersion of light also occurs when light from a luminous source strikes an object with any color other than black or white. When white light strikes an object that is red, the light is dispersed into all its component colors. However, most of the colors are absorbed by the object and only red light is reflected. Since red light is reflected, we see a red object. If an object is white, all the light is reflected by the object. Since all wavelengths of light are reflected, the wavelengths blend together to form white light, and we see a white object. If an object were absolutely black, all light would be absorbed and no light would be reflected. If this were the case, the object would be invisible, since no light is reflected. However, there are no absolutely black objects on Earth, so a little light reflects from even black objects. When rays of reflected light reach our eyes, the rays are converted into nerve impulses by photoreceptors. There are two types of photoreceptors: rods, which are sensitive to light intensity, and cones, which are sensitive to color. One kind of cone is sensitive to red light, another is sensitive to green light, and a third kind of cone is sensitive to blue light. When red light reaches the retina, cones sensitive to red light are activated. These cones send impulses to the brain, which interprets the color as red. Likewise, green light activates cones sensitive to green light, and blue light activates cones sensitive to blue light. The impulses from the cones travel to the visual cortex of the brain, where they are interpreted as the colors red, green, and blue. But what about colors other than red, green, or blue? If we have cones only for red, green, or blue, how do we see something that is yellow or purple? To explain how we see other colors, we need to understand additive color mixing. The colors red, green, and blue are called additive primary colors of light. They are called primary colors because they cannot be formed by mixing other colors of light. Additive primary colors are not the only set of primary colors. Several sets of primary colors exist. One set of primary colors refers to colors of pigments, like paints or inks. These primary colors are cyan, magenta, and yellow. Printers also add black, which is indicated with the letter K. So these colors are called CMYK primaries. Artists have their own set of primary colors. They use red, yellow, and blue. This is the RYB set of primaries. However, in physics, when we talk about additive primary colors, we are referring to the primary colors of light: red, green, and blue. Additive primary colors are also known as RGB primaries. Colors of light other than additive primary colors are produced by mixing 2 or 3 primary colors. Blending colors of light to produce other colors of light is called additive color mixing. We can demonstrate additive color mixing with an optical bench. An optical bench is a rigid, adjustable platform for the precise positioning of optical instruments, such as mirrors, lenses, and light sources for optical experiments. An LED light source produces red, green, and blue light. A lens focuses the light onto a reflective screen. If we start with the additive primary color green and add red, yellow is produced where the two primary colors overlap. Yellow is a secondary color. A secondary color is a color produced by mixing two additive primary colors. Another secondary color is produced by additive mixing of red and blue. This secondary color is called magenta. If we mix blue and green, additive color mixing produces the secondary color cyan. By decreasing the intensity of a primary additive color mixing can produce colors other than primary or secondary colors. If we mix red light at full intensity with green light at 50% intensity, the color orange is produced. If we mix blue light at 100% intensity with green light at 50% intensity, cornflower blue is produced. If we add red and blue at full intensity with green at 50% intensity, we see the color pink in the center where all three primary colors blend. Additive mixing of green and blue at full intensity and red at 50% intensity produces several colors. We have already seen that cyan is produced where the blue and green overlap. Purple is produced where the blue and red overlap. Where the green and red overlap, a pale yellow-green color called chartreuse is produced. In the center, where all three primary colors meet, sky blue is produced. Notice what happens when we mix all three additive primary colors at full intensity. In the center, where all three colors overlap, white light is produced. Colors that produce white light when they are mixed are called complementary colors. Each additive primary color is also complementary with a secondary color. Mixing red with cyan produces white, so red and cyan are complementary. Since the secondary color cyan is produced by additive mixing of blue and green, mixing cyan and red is the same as mixing all three primaries. Green and magenta are also complementary, as well as blue and yellow. Now that we understand additive color mixing, we can return to the discussion of how our eyes enable us to see all the colors. The cones in our eyes use additive color mixing to allow us to see colors other than the additive primary colors. Yellow is a secondary color produced by a mixture of red and green light at full intensity. If an object is yellow, then light with the wavelengths of red and green enter the eye and stimulate the red cones and green cones equally. These cones send impulses to the visual cortex of the brain. The visual cortex blends these impulses together to form an image that is yellow. If an object is orange, light with the wavelengths of red and green are reflected, but the green color is not as intense as the red color. When the reflected light enters the eye, red and green cones are stimulated, but only half as many green cones are stimulated. The brain interprets the impulses as orange. If an object is pink, like these balloons, light with the wavelengths of red, green, and blue are reflected, but the intensity of green is only 50%. An equal number of red and blue cones are stimulated, but only half as many green cones are stimulated, and we see pink. Light reflects from illuminated objects, so we can see them. But some illuminated objects reflect light better than others. In fact, some illuminated objects reflect light so well that we can see a reflected image. A surface capable of reflecting light to form an image is a mirror. We will look at the two kinds of mirrors, plane mirrors and spherical mirrors. Plane mirrors have flat, reflective surfaces. Spherical mirrors have curved, reflective surfaces. A spherical mirror is concave if its reflective surface curves inward, away from the observer. It is convex if its reflective surface curves outward, toward the observer. Keep in mind that the words plane and spherical refer to the shape of the reflective surface of the mirrors, not their outside shapes. A plane mirror can be round as long as its reflective surface is flat. Likewise, a spherical mirror can be square as long as its reflective surface is curved. A graphical representation of the possible paths that light rays may follow while interacting with a mirror or lens is called a ray diagram. A ray diagram illustrates how light behaves when it reflects from a mirror. In a ray diagram, the illuminated object is represented by a solid, upright arrow. The image is indicated by an outlined arrow. An imaginary line drawn through the center of a mirror is called the optical axis. A ray diagram can help us pinpoint where the reflected image will appear. So we start with the mirror, the optical axis, and the object. Next, we draw an incident ray from the top of the object to the mirror parallel to the optical axis. A mirror adheres to the law of reflection. So since the incident ray strikes the mirror at a 90-degree angle, it reflects at the same angle, 90 degrees. Since this reflected ray bounces back along the same path as the incident ray, we will not keep it in the final ray diagram. Next, we draw an extension of the reflected ray behind the mirror. For the second incident ray, we draw a line from the top of the object to the point where the optical axis meets the mirror. This incident ray strikes the mirror at an angle of 32 degrees, so it will reflect from the mirror at the same angle, 32 degrees. Next, we add an extension to the reflected ray that follows the same path as the reflected ray, but behind the mirror. The top of the image will appear at the point where the two reflected ray extensions converge. Since the extensions converge above the optical axis and even with the top of the object, the image will be upright and the same size as the object. The type of image that appears to form behind a mirror is called a virtual image. Light rays do not actually converge behind the mirror, but to the observer, the image appears to be behind the mirror. A virtual image can be directly seen by an observer if the observer is in the correct position to see reflected rays from the mirror, but it cannot be projected onto a reflective screen. The opposite of a virtual image is a real image. A real image is one that usually cannot be directly seen by an observer, but it can be projected onto a reflective screen. We will discuss real images later in this lab. The reflected image formed by a plane mirror will always be virtual, upright, and the same size as the object. This is not always true of spherical mirrors. To see what happens to reflected images with spherical mirrors, let's use this laser ray box. The ray box emits two parallel beams of laser light. When the beams strike a concave mirror, they are reflected toward a single point in front of the mirror. This is the focal point of the concave mirror. Since the focal point is in front of the mirror, a concave mirror will produce a real image in most situations. Now see what happens when we insert a convex mirror into the laser beams. Instead of converging, the laser beams diverge away from the axis. Extensions of the reflected rays can be drawn behind the mirror. The extensions converge at the focal point, which is behind the mirror. Since the focal point is in back of the mirror, a convex mirror will produce a virtual image. A concave mirror will usually produce an image that is inverted. An inverted image is one in which the part of the object that is normally at the top appears to be at the bottom in the image. If the image is upright, the part of the object that is normally at the top also appears at the top of the image. We will use our optical bench to conduct some experiments with concave and convex mirrors. But before we begin, we need to explain some terms used to describe spherical mirrors. Since concave mirrors are spherical, ray diagrams for concave mirrors are drawn differently than ray diagrams for plane mirrors. Like a plane mirror, a spherical mirror has an optical axis. The point where the optical axis meets a spherical mirror is called the vertex. It also has a focal point. A ray diagram for a spherical mirror includes another point called the center of curvature. The center of curvature is a point on the optical axis, a distance from the mirror equal to the radius of the curve of the mirror. If we draw a circle whose circumference includes the curve of the mirror, C would be at the center of the circle. The center of curvature is also twice the distance from the vertex to the focal point. The first incident ray is drawn from the top of the object parallel to the optical axis. It will reflect and pass through the focal point. A second incident ray drawn from the top of the object and passing through the focal point will reflect parallel to the optical axis. The image will appear where the reflected rays converge. Notice that the image is inverted. The image formed by a concave mirror is usually inverted. Also notice that the image is smaller than the object. A ratio of the size of an image relative to the size of the object is called magnification. We often think of the word magnification as enlarging, but in physics, magnification can be enlarging or diminishing. If the image appears to be the same size as the object, the mirror has a magnification of +1. If the image appears larger than the object, the magnification of the mirror is greater than 1. For example, if an image is twice the size of the object, the mirror has a magnification of +2. If the image appears smaller than the object, the magnification is expressed as a ratio. If the image is 1/2 the size of the object, the magnification of the mirror is +1 to 2. A magnification value has either a positive or negative sign. A positive sign indicates an upright image. A negative sign indicates an inverted image. For this experiment, we will use a concave mirror mounted in a frame that permits us to keep the mirror in the same location, but change the angle of reflection. We will use an LED light for the object. The light will shine through a number 4 that has been cut out of this wheel. The number 4 is used because we can easily tell if the image is inverted. The image will be focused onto this reflective screen. The concave mirror is mounted at the 120 centimeter mark on the optical bench. This mirror has a 19 centimeter focal length, so the reflected ray will pass through the focal point that is 19 centimeters away from the mirror at the 101 centimeter mark on the bench. Since the center of curvature is twice the focal length, it will be located 38 centimeters from the mirror at the 82 centimeter mark on the bench. This is where we have placed the object. We have placed the reflective screen next to the object.
An object placed at the center of curvature should produce an image that is real, inverted, and the same size as the object. The image should have a magnification of -1.
Now we will adjust the mirror so the image reflects onto the reflective screen. As we can see, the image is inverted and the same size as the object. Next, we move the object beyond the center of curvature to the 72.5 centimeter mark on the optical bench. According to our ray diagram, an object placed beyond the center of curvature should produce an image that is real, inverted, and smaller than the object. This image has a magnification of -1 to 2. The image should appear between the center of curvature and the focal point.
To see the image, we have moved the reflective screen to the 93 centimeter mark on the optical bench.
As we can see, the image is inverted and 1/2 the size of the object. Next, we will place the object between the center of curvature and the focal point at the 91.5 centimeter mark on the optical bench. According to our ray diagram, an object placed between the center of curvature and the focal point should produce an image that is real, inverted, and twice the size of the object. The image has a magnification of -2. The image should appear beyond the center of curvature. We will slide the reflective screen back until the image comes into focus. As we can see, the image is inverted and twice the size of the object. Now, let's see what happens when we use a convex mirror. According to our ray diagram of a convex mirror, the focal point of a convex mirror is behind the mirror. So, the image produced by the mirror should be virtual and upright. When the object is located the same distance in front of the mirror as the focal point is behind the mirror, the image is upright and smaller than the object. The image will have a magnification of +1 to 2. Since the image is virtual, it will not project on a reflective screen. But if we tilt the mirror back slightly, we should be able to see the image in the mirror. As we can see, the image produced by the convex mirror is virtual, upright, and about 1/2 the size of the object. The image is also laterally inverted, which means it appears as if the left and right side of the image are reversed. If the object is located farther away from a convex mirror, the image is still virtual and upright, but it will be smaller than the image in the previous ray diagram. It will have a magnification of +1 to 4. Let's move the object twice the focal length in front of the mirror. As we can see, the image is virtual, upright, and 1/4 of the size of the object. If the object is placed closer to the mirror, the image is still virtual and upright, but this time its size will not be as small. The image will have a magnification of +3 to 4. If we move the object to 1/2 the focal length from the mirror, the image is still virtual and upright, but it is 3/4 the size of the object. In this lab, we have seen the effects of optics on a prism and on mirrors. In our next lab, we will see how optics affect lenses. At this time, proceed with the corresponding activities.